The reign over Rabaul in August of 1945 felt like a final judgment, a weeping sky turning the parade ground into a murky, unforgiving mirror of brown water and ash. The ghost of a fallen empire clung to the humid air, heavy with the scent of defeat and disinfectant. Then a single whistle cut through the mournful quiet, a sound as sharp and final as a razor's edge. A shiver ran through the line of 300 Japanese women as they stood in silence, a collective shroud of dread covering them. They had been drilled for this moment, not for surrender, but for the sharp taste of cyanide, a swift, honorable death. But honor was a phantom now, and all that remained was the cold, clinging mud on their bare ankles and the crushing weight of their emperor's shame. A rough voice shouted a command in English, a language they associated only with bombs and broadcasts about beasts. Lower. They obeyed without question, their heads sinking so deeply their caps brushed their knees, a posture of absolute submission. They were the condemned, and a reckoning was at hand. But the punishment they had braced for never came. Instead, there was only a disquieting stillness from the Australian soldiers who stood before them. Their faces were unreadable, carved from exhaustion, and their rifles were slung with a casualness that was more terrifying than outright aggression. The silence stretched each second a lifetime until another strange command broke through the tension. At ease. The interpreter hesitated, and a wave of confusion passed through the women. They didn't understand. This wasn't part of the script of defeat. A guard stepped forward, his hand open and palm up in a gesture so slow and gentle it seemed meant for frightened animals. That small motion, so devoid of menace, was a crack in the foundation of their world. A few dared to lift their eyes. One of them, a 20-year-old nurse named Junko Mori, saw her first Allied face. He didn't carry the face of a demon from the propaganda posters, but of a boy with young, sunburned eyes that held weariness, not cruelty. In that hollowed-out moment, he looked so much like her brother before Guadalcanal swallowed him whole. Then the whistle blew again, signaling their return to quarters. The guards turned their backs and walked away first, letting the defeated move second. It was an act of deference so profound, so alien to their world of rigid hierarchy that it broke something inside them. Quietly, some began to weep, not from fear, but from a disorientation far stranger and more unsettling. As she finally straightened, Junko saw one guard glance back, his eyes soft, not hostile. That single forbidden glance was a spark in the ashes of their world, the beginning of a chain reaction that neither side could possibly comprehend or control. The next morning, the same parade ground. Mist hung low over the camp, blurring the barbed wire into a silver haze. Boots crunched on gravel. The women stood again, heads lowered, but this time their breaths were steadier. Fear dulled into a strange, heavy curiosity. When the guard line halted, Junko risked it a fraction of an inch, just enough to lift her gaze, and that's when it happened. Their eyes met hers, swollen from sleeplessness. His blue-gray and wary both froze for a second. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath. The Australian guard shifted, breaking the spell. He reached for something on his belt. Junko flinched, expecting the strike she'd been trained to brace for. Instead, he pulled out a metal canteen, unscrewed it, and without a word extended it toward her. She hesitated. In Imperial training, accepting water from the enemy was a disgrace, proof of defeat. Yet the thirst burned in her throat like acid. Slowly, she took it. The water was warm, metallic, but it tasted like reality. She looked up again, and the guard's expression softened, half pity, half confusion, as if he too couldn't understand why offering water felt like rebellion. Across the line, other guards watched. One smirked, another looked away, but no one stopped him. Later, Junko would write in her journal, "He handed me water, not orders." That sentence would appear decades later in war archives cited by historians studying the psychology of surrender. Allied records show that less than 4% of POWs under Allied control died in captivity, compared to over 27% under Japanese custody. The numbers alone shattered everything these women had believed. Their own empire, they realized, had treated captives far worse than their supposed barbarians. That night, whispers spread through the barracks. They don't hate us. They give medicine. They smile. Confusion curdled into something deeper, shame, wrapped in gratitude. For the first time, Junko and the others felt the ground tilt beneath the moral map they'd lived by. When lights out came, Junko lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. The canteen still sat beside her cot, half full. She didn't drink the rest. She just watched it glint in the moonlight, proof that mercy could be stranger than fear. And by dawn, that mercy would spread beyond water. By the third day, the shock had settled into routine. Roll call inspection meal. But something invisible had shifted between captor and captive, a rhythm less like domination, more like uneasy coexistence. Junko noticed how the guards moved slower now, less mechanical. They no longer barked orders. They requested them. One medic, Corporal Lewis, walked down the line with a clipboard and a bandaged hand. He stopped when he saw her shivering in the morning mist. "Frostbite?" he asked softly. She didn't respond, didn't know how. He crouched, peeling back the corner of her soaked sock. To her horror, he grimaced, not with disgust but concern. Then right there, on the gravel, he pulled a small tin of ointment from his kit and began treating her foot. She wanted to protest. Officers don't bow. Enemies don't kneel. But he did. The whispers started that night. "Why are they kind?" one woman murmured. "They are the enemy," another hissed. Yet even as they repeated it, no one sounded convinced. The camp's medical tent became a symbol of cognitive dissonance. Beds lined with Japanese PW tended by Allied medics. Some women cried from pain, others from humiliation. But one nurse, Takahashi, whispered to Junko, "Maybe this is what mercy feels like when you don't deserve it." Records from the Rabaul camp show that over 8 tons of medical supplies were used monthly, nearly the same amount allocated to Allied soldiers themselves. The Red Cross reported that POW care in Pacific camps consumed enough resources to treat 1,200 civilian patients per month. The irony was cruel. Women once trained to deny care to the wounded now received it freely from their enemy. Junko couldn't escape the weight of it. Each dressing change, each dose of disinfectant tore open a deeper wound. The memory of her own patients, Allied prisoners she'd been ordered to ignore. She started asking herself questions that had no answers. That night, when the guard brought their meal, watery rice and canned meat, she stared at it for a long time before eating. Her hands trembled not from hunger but guilt, because now for the first time kindness felt heavier than punishment, and by the following dusk, that guilt would find its voice in a confession that no one expected. Night fell like a curtain of damp velvet over the Rabaul camp. Inside the barracks, the air smelled of mildew, sweat, and quiet regret. A small circle of women sat around a metal barrel glowing with weak firelight. The flames twisted shadows across their faces, faces that had once worn crisp nurse uniforms, now hollowed by shame. Junko listened as one of them, Sergeant Akiko, finally spoke. "I was in a field hospital near Manila," she began, voice shaking. "We had Allied captives. They begged for water. Our officer said, 'They are no longer human.'" Her lips trembled. "We obeyed. We let them die." The crackle of fire swallowed the rest. No one interrupted. Another voice followed Takahashi, the medic who'd whispered about mercy days earlier. "We thought cruelty was duty. Now kindness feels like betrayal." Around the circle, some women cried openly. Others stared blankly, lost somewhere between denial and awakening. According to post-war interrogations, about 30% of captured Japanese nurses admitted to witnessing or assisting in war crimes, often under extreme duress. The numbers are buried deep in archives, but the emotional math inside this barrack was simple. Obedience had cost them their humanity. Junko pressed her palms together, trying to steady her breathing. In the Empire's moral code, guilt was weakness, confession, disgrace. Yet here inside a foreign cage, guilt was the only proof that something human still remained. Akiko whispered, "Do you think they know what we did?" Junko replied quietly. "Maybe that's why they're kind." No one slept that night. The rain drummed softly on the tin roof as memories replayed like punishment. The same hands that once tightened bandages had also tightened ropes. Each heartbeat felt like an apology. At dawn, the barrel's embers had cooled to ash. The women rose without speaking. Their eyes were red but clearer, as if sorrow had washed away propaganda more effectively than any Allied lecture ever could. And when breakfast came, a bowl of thin rice, Junko made a choice. She would not eat, not until she had done anything to balance the weight. That evening, she saw her chance. The rain had eased by evening, leaving the camp drenched and steaming. Dinner came in, dented metal bowls, rice thin as soup, a spoonful of tinned meat floating on top. The guards moved down the line in silence, checking each prisoner's ration. Junko clutched her bowl, staring at it. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but the guilt from last night clawed deeper. Across the fence, a wounded Australian guard sat propped against a post, his bandage stained dark. He was one of the men who'd handed her water days ago. Now his hand trembled as he tried to eat his own ration. No one helped him. Rules forbade crossing the perimeter. Junko hesitated, glancing toward the other women. No one met her eyes. The fire from their confessions still lingered, but no one dared act on it. She made her decision in silence. When the sentry turned away, she slipped from the line, carrying her bowl like contraband. Her bare feet splashed through puddles until she reached the fence. The guard looked up, startled. Junko knelt, pushed the bowl through a gap in the wire. He froze, then impossibly he smiled. "No," he whispered. "Keep it." She shook her head, voice barely a breath. Please, for a moment, the only sound was rain tapping against tin. Then he did something that stopped her heart. He bowed. A small, quick dip of the head. Respect, gratitude, equality. Reports indicate the average POW ration in Allied camps was about 1,800 calories per day, while a frontline Allied soldier consumed around 3,200. The imbalance was massive. Yet here, one prisoner had given up the little she had to feed her captor. That single exchange rippled through the camp. Word spread within hours. The Japanese woman gave food to an Aussie. Some guards laughed. Others grew quiet. For the prisoners, it was unthinkable. A reversal of the war's moral script. A gesture that said, "We are no longer enemies trapped by flags." That night, Junko sat empty stomach, but strangely calm. The fence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a mirror. Both sides were starving for the same thing, dignity, and the next morning that mirror cracked wide open. The story of the rice bowl spread like wildfire through Rabaul. Within days, both guards and captives began testing the invisible border that separated them. First came small exchanges. A cigarette slipped through the fence, a folded scrap of paper with a clumsy sketch, then a harmonica. One afternoon, a sound floated across the yard, thin at first, then fuller. A tune Junko didn't recognize, but its rhythm felt like heartbeat. The guards paused, curious. The women inside the barracks listened in silence, until one of them began humming softly. Within minutes, another joined, then another. Soon, English and Japanese voices wove into a single thread. Home, sweet home. The moment was fragile, dangerous. They knew it broke every rule of war, yet nobody stopped. The guards leaned against their rifles, heads bowed in thought as their supposed enemies sang about family loss and longing. In that moment, no one was victor or captive, just survivors sharing a melody. Later testimonies describe how music became a secret language inside POW camps. Reports show over 70% of post-1945 prisoner memoirs mentioned songs or improvised instruments as emotional lifelines. For Rabaul, this was more than distraction. It was rebellion through harmony. Junko wrote in her diary, "The sound was softer than forgiveness, but it was the same shape." When she looked up, she saw Corporal Lewis, the medic who'd once knelt to treat her, standing beyond the fence, eyes closed, mouthing the words with them. That evening, the guards didn't sound the curfew whistle. They just let the song end naturally, fading with the sea breeze. It was the first night in weeks the camp felt human. Even the mosquitoes seemed to hum along, but harmony has a way of drawing unwanted attention. 2 days later, rumors reached headquarters. Fraternization sympathy, breach of protocol. Orders were being drafted fast. The same music that had stitched hearts together now threatened to unravel discipline. As the women lay in their bunks that night, unaware of what was coming, Junko whispered, "Maybe they'll understand." By morning, new footsteps echoed in the compound. Crisp, official, unkind. Morning broke with military precision. No song, no smiles, just the heavy rhythm of boots on wet gravel. A jeep rolled into the compound, its tires hissing through puddles. An officer in a pressed uniform stepped out, papers in hand, eyes cold as the steel buttons on his chest. The message came straight from headquarters. End all unnecessary contact. Maintain discipline. No fraternization. The guards froze. The air thickened. Junko could tell from their faces that something had shifted back. Something fragile had just been crushed under the weight of war protocol. Corporal Lewis read the order twice, lips tight. Then he turned toward the barracks, where the diary pages, notes, sketches, fragments of music lay hidden under a wooden crate. That evening, when the women were ordered to stay inside, smoke began curling from a small fire pit behind the medic tent. Lewis crouched beside it, feeding pages into the flames. He didn't look away. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. Their shared story erased by command. A young private asked him quietly, "Sir, why burn it?" Lewis replied without emotion, "Orders are orders." Then, almost to himself, even kindness has rules. According to Allied records, at least 12 personnel were court-martialed in 1946 for excessive empathy toward prisoners. In wars, accounting compassion could be as dangerous as sabotage. The system couldn't risk empathy spreading through ranks. Its softened edges meant to stay sharp. That night, Junko saw the smoke drift across the fence, the smell of burnt paper mixed with the sea air. She didn't know exactly what had been destroyed, but she felt its absence, a silence that tasted like ash. The guards' faces the next day were different, eyes averted, hands stricter. Still, Lewis couldn't unsee what he'd seen, the bow, the song, the shared humanity. When his superior ordered no communication, he nodded. But later he did something quietly defiant. He began to write again, not for the record, for remembrance. Under a floorboard in his quarters, a notebook took shape, small leather-bound, filled with drawings of the women who bowed. And that secret diary would one day outlive them all. The notebook was no bigger than a soldier's hand, brown leather cover edges, worn corners dark with sweat. Corporal Lewis hid it beneath a loose floorboard under his cot, away from prying eyes and inspections. Every night after roll call, when the camp settled into uneasy silence, he'd lift the board and write by candle stub. He recorded everything. The rain that turned to mist at dawn, the smell of disinfectant drifting from the infirmary, the way Junko bowed slightly before speaking. He sketched faces, not perfect but human, and scribbled notes like they bow lower when afraid but look up quicker now. Sometimes he pressed a wildflower between the pages. Other nights, just a single line, "We are all pretending to be enemies. It wasn't supposed to exist." If caught, it would mean insubordination, but something in him refused to let the moment die. He'd watched brutality, seen men break under orders. This camp was different, an island of paradox where mercy survived the war's mathematics. Years later, archivists would confirm the diary's authenticity, recovered in 1973 when the Rabaul site was excavated for redevelopment. Today, it rests in the Australian War Memorial Archives, each page stained by humidity and time. Among the entries is one that historians still debate. A drawing of Junko standing in rain-head bowed, captioned only with 3 words, "They bowed lower." Junko never knew it existed. But its pages became her ghost biography, preserving a version of her that history almost erased, the girl who disobeyed fear. Allied analysts who later studied the document called it an anomaly of empathy. But to Lewis, it was a confession. He wasn't documenting prisoners. He was documenting redemption. One entry reads, "If we burn memory, war wins twice." That line would resurface decades later in a museum exhibit etched into glass, without attribution. By the time Lewis was transferred in early 1946, the diary was full. He nailed the floorboard shut, whispering, "Stay hidden." Then he walked out of Rabaul for the last time, and while he forgot to sign his name on the final page, history would soon sign it for him through the woman he'd drawn most often. For 40 years, Junko Mori's story remained a ghost buried beneath the suffocating silence of a nation that treated survival as a form of shame. The memories of Rabaul, the metallic taste of water from an enemy's canteen, the shared song that briefly erased the barbed wire, the quiet dignity of a guard's bow were hers alone, a dangerous and private truth. Then, a letter arrived from Australia, a key that unlocked the past. Inside was a single photocopied page from a diary she never knew existed, a sketch of a young woman bowing in the rain. That image, drawn by Corporal Lewis's compassionate hand, fractured the silence forever. When Junko finally spoke, her voice, once forbidden, echoed across oceans. She told not of war, but of the small human rebellions that took root in its shadow. Her testimony, culminating in the powerful declaration, "Every time we bowed, we learned to lift our heads a little higher," became a bridge between former enemies. Today, in the quiet halls of the Australian War, Memorial Lewis's small leather-bound diary rests under glass. It is there that the story finds its enduring postscript. When Junko's granddaughter stands before the display, her eyes meet those of an aging Australian veteran. No words are needed. They simply bow to one another, a gesture stripped of its history of submission, reborn as a pure, simple act of recognition. The war ended long ago, its official instruments of surrender signed and filed away. But true peace began here in the quiet exchange between two souls, proving that the smallest acts of humanity can outlive the grandest monuments to conflict, rewriting history not with ink, but with respect.